My mother-in-law gifted an iPhone 16 Pro Max to all her grandchildren except for my daughter because she's not family. With a smile. I gave her 24 hours to get out of my house where she was living rent-free. Real family doesn't live on charity. I told her, these are for family, sweetie. My mother-in-law's words cut through the air like shattered glass as my 8-year-old daughter stared at the iPhone 16 Pro Max as she had just handed out to all the other children. The silence that followed was deafening. 20 people in my living room in the house that I bought, witnessing her deliberately exclude my little girl from the most expensive family gift of the year. Why isn't there one for me, Grandma? My daughter asked with that soul-crushing innocence, because you're not really family treasure. These are only for my blood grandchildren. The sound of my daughter running upstairs sobbing mixed with the uncomfortable laughter of the guests. When I confronted my mother-in-law, she just shrugged, it's my money, I'll give it to whomever I please. The next day, my wife returned from her trip. Her reaction froze my blood. Mom's just old. I'm sure she didn't mean any harm. You're overreacting, as usual. That night everything changed. You have 24 hours to choose, I told my wife. Either your mother leaves my house or you leave with her. The first battle came at dawn. My wife found me in the kitchen making coffee, with the calm of someone who had already made an irrevocable decision. You can't just throw her out on the street. She yelled that high-pitched voice she used when she was losing control. She's my mother, she's old, it's my house. I said without raising my voice. The deadline is non-negotiable. What is she supposed to do? Live on the street. She should have thought of that before she humiliated my daughter. The slight was deliberate towards the little girl you've raised since she was 2, the little girl who calls you mom. I saw her face crumble as I put it in perspective, but the moment of vulnerability lasted only seconds before family loyalty closed ranks. My mother-in-law, emboldened by my wife's support, barricaded herself in the guest suite. When I went down to remind her that she had 18 hours left, I was met with a smile that chilled my blood. I'm not going anywhere. I have tenants' rights. Her voice dripped with the confidence that only legal ignorance can provide. If you try anything, I'll call the police for domestic violence. My wife became her personal servant, bringing her food and acting as her human shield. Leave her alone, she would tell me. Every time I approached that part of the house she stressed enough as it is. That afternoon I made the call that would change everything. My lawyer confirmed what I suspected, a legal eviction could take months. My advice, he told me, as a professional who bills by the minute, is to document every breath that woman takes in your house, every insult, every threat, every time she spits in your direction. In hostile eviction cases, the one with the better documentation wins. That night I created a password-protected digital file, or diary. I called it and I started logging everything, date, time, detailed description, every slam of the suite door, every veiled insult, she muttered as I passed through the kitchen. Every time my daughter came downstairs crying because Grandma won't talk to me. The first discovery came when I checked the bank statements. My wife had given her debit card. The charges were obscene, $340 on Amazon for a luxury coffee maker shipped directly to the suite. $180 for Korean skincare products. $95 for premium vitamin supplements. Seriously, I showed the statement to my wife. You're giving her money after what she did to our daughter, their medical expenses. She replied without looking me in the eye, she's old, she needs things. I documented every transaction. Each luxury purchase was another line in my file, another piece of proof that there was no humility, no remorse. The nuclear escalation came a week later. A social worker from Child Protective Services knocked on my door with an anonymous complaint, an unstable and potentially dangerous environment for a minor due to severe domestic conflicts. When I calmly explained the situation, presenting copies of my initial diary as evidence of a pattern of hostility and emotional abuse towards my daughter, her expression completely changed. Person who made this report, she said before leaving, provided very specific details about your house, details that only someone living here would know. My wife refused to believe it when I showed her the report. It must have been someone else. You're making things up to turn me against my mother, her eyes shone with that blind fury that appears when reality collides with denial. That night I installed security cameras in all the common areas. It's a recommendation from the social worker. I informed them during dinner to ensure transparency in the home. My wife couldn't object. My mother-in-law turned pale. I filed the formal eviction notice. The next day, 30 days, the official clock had started ticking. The house transformed into a Cold War zone. My wife moved to the living room sofa, refusing to share a bed with me. Our daughter was trapped in the middle of a silence that seemed to cut the air. But in that chaos I did something that filled me with a strange peace. I secretly bought my daughter the latest iPhone 16 Pro Max. I gave it to her in her room, the box wrapped in simple gift paper. "This is from Dad," I said, hugging her as her eyes filled with happy tears. "But keep it a secret for now, so we don't cause more trouble." It was my way of protecting her in the midst of the chaos, of reminding her that, no matter what happened, she was my priority. As I watched the camera recordings each night, I realized something. This was no longer just about kicking my mother-in-law out. My objective had changed. I wanted to save my wife from her own denial before it was too late for the three of us. The official eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a sheriff, who seemed more uncomfortable than we were. 30 days the war had become official. My mother-in-law received the document with a smile that chilled my blood. 30 days to find a good lawyer who will teach you who's really in charge here, she told me, waving the paper as if it were confetti. The cameras I had installed became my salvation. The first capture came that same afternoon. I was reviewing the recordings when I heard my mother-in-law talking to my wife in the kitchen. "Once this idiot runs out of money for lawyers, he'll give up. Besides, this house should be yours by right. You're my daughter, not him." My wife murmured something inaudible. She didn't contradict her. I saved the file immediately. The second capture was 2 days later. I recorded her accidentally scratching the hardwood floor in the living room with one of her heavy suitcases, dragging it with deliberate force, while looking directly at me. When I pretended not to see, she smiled and kept doing it. "What happened here?" I asked my wife that night, pointing to the marks. "It must have been an accident. Mom has arthritis, she can't carry things well," but I had the video. Every deliberate movement, every malicious smile. The third capture was the one that changed everything. The hallway camera recorded her entering my office when she thought no one was home. I watched her go through my desk, open drawers, and finally take a pair of silver cufflinks that I belonged to my father and put them in her purse. When I mentioned to my wife that things were missing, her response confirmed how lost she was. I'm sure she just put them somewhere safe so they wouldn't get lost. With all this mess of lawyers and papers, my wife had crossed the line. It was no longer just denial, it was active complicity. The straw that broke the camel's back came a week later. I was working from home when I heard screams from the garden. I ran out and found my daughter crying by the pool, completely soaked with her clothes. On what happened, I yelled at my mother-in-law, who was standing at the edge with her arms crossed. "She slipped," she said with that cold smile. I knew all too well she was running where she shouldn't have been. My daughter was trembling in my arms. "Daddy, I didn't slip. Grandma pushed me because I told her I didn't love her anymore." Children lie all the time. My mother-in-law retorted, especially those who haven't learned to respect their elders. That night, as I dried my daughter's hair, I made the decision that would change everything. It was time to end this farce. I waited for the perfect moment, told my wife. I wanted to have a truce night to talk and sort things out like adults. I ordered her favorite food from that Thai restaurant she loved. I put candles on the dining room table. I created an atmosphere of false hope. My mother-in-law had gone for a walk, probably to complain to some neighbor about how terrible we had the house to ourselves. My wife sat at the table with a cautious expression, as if expecting an apology or a surrender. Her hands were clasped, nervous but hopeful. I didn't say anything at first. I simply turned on the dining room TV and connected my laptop. "What are you doing?" she asked. "I want to show you something." I replied with the calm that comes from holding all the cards. The first video began to play, her mother telling her that the house should be hers by right and that I was an idiot who would give up. I watched my wife's face tense. "This must be out of context," she murmured, but her voice no longer sounded convinced. "Wait, there's more." The second video showed the deliberate sabotage of the floor, every calculated movement, every defiant look at the camera. My mother-in-law knew exactly what she was doing. "Can't be." My wife started shaking her head, but her eyes were fixed on the screen. The third video was the final blow, theft of my father's cufflinks. Clear, sharp, undeniable. I watched her open my desk, specifically look for those items and hide them in her purse. My wife fell silent, mouth agape. "This," I said, playing the audio my lawyer had legally obtained, "is the call to Child Protective Services." My mother-in-law's voice was unmistakable. "I want to report a dangerous situation for a minor. The stepfather is creating a hostile and violent environment. Child is at risk." My wife's house of cards, built on denial, collapsed in an instant. I watched her face go through all the stages: shock, comprehension, pain, anger. She burst into tears. But these tears were different. She wasn't crying for her mother or for the situation. She was crying for her own blindness, for the pain she had allowed to be inflicted on the child she had raised as her own, for the betrayal she had unwittingly been an accomplice to. She whispered, "How could I have been so blind? How could I let her do this to our daughter?" At that moment we heard the front door close. My mother-in-law had returned from her walk, probably satisfied after poisoning another neighbor. Against me, my wife wiped her tears and stood up from the table with the determination I hadn't seen in years. She walked towards the guest suite with steps that sounded like hammer blows. I followed her silently, staying in the hallway. This was her battle, one she had to win alone. She opened the door without knocking. My mother-in-law was arranging her day's purchases. She had spent more of my wife's money on luxury products she didn't need. "Mom," my wife said in a voice I had never heard her use before. "As cold as steel, pack your things. You're leaving now." My mother-in-law turned with that condescending smile she had perfected over decades. "Excuse me, I'm not going anywhere. This is my home as much as it is yours. I saw the videos, Mom. I saw everything." The smile vanished from my mother-in-law's face, as if cold water had been thrown on it. "I saw you steal. I saw you damage the house on purpose. I heard you call social services to harm an innocent child." My wife's voice trembled, but not with fear, with contained fury. "And I saw you push my daughter into the pool. You have no proof of any of that." My mother-in-law staggered, but her arrogance had completely disappeared. My wife took out her phone and showed her one of the videos. "Isn't this proof?" For the first time since I've known her, I saw real fear in my mother-in-law's eyes, the fear of someone who finally understood that her actions had consequences. "You have 2 hours." My wife continued. "Call whoever you need to call, find a place to stay. But by 9 o'clock tonight I don't want to see you in this house. You can't do this to me. You're a mother. Doesn't hurt her daughter's children. A mother doesn't steal. A mother doesn't lie." My wife took another step closer. "You haven't been my mother for a long time. You've been a parasite." My mother-in-law tried one last desperate attack. "He's brainwashing you. He recorded those videos to manipulate you." "No," my wife responded with a terrifying calm. "He installed those cameras to protect our family from you." I stood in the hallway watching the power shift. I didn't intervene. There was no need. My wife had found her voice, her backbone, her limit, and for the first time in months, I saw a glimmer of hope for our marriage. The war was about to end. The most important victory had already been won. My wife had opened her eyes. The next day I witnessed something I never thought I'd see: my wife with a glacial calm I didn't know she possessed, helping her mother pack. There were no screams or pleas, just a heavy silence that seemed to crush the air in the room. My mother-in-law made one last desperate attempt at manipulation. She threw herself on the suite floor, sobbing with a performance she had perfected over decades. "He's turned you against me," she cried, grabbing the hem of my wife's pants like a child. "I'm your mother. You can't do this to me." My wife stopped and looked down at her coldness, and her voice sent a shiver down my spine. "No, you did this. You hurt my daughter. You pushed a child into a pool and you stole from my own house." She knelt down to her mother's level. "It's over." For the first time in my life, I saw true fear in my mother-in-law's eyes. The woman who had dominated my wife for decades realized she had lost all her power in an instant. "You have no right," she yelled, standing up with a desperation she had never shown. "This house should be mine. I'm blood, family, family." My wife straightened up, and for the first time I saw the strong woman who had hidden for years behind the obedient daughter. A family doesn't push children. A family doesn't steal. A family doesn't call social services to hurt innocent people. The mother-in-law tried one last card. "You're going to regret this. You're nothing without me. I raised you, I gave you everything. You conditioned me, you manipulated me. You taught me to prioritize your comfort over the well-being of my own daughter." My wife's voice broke, but not from weakness, from liberation. Not anymore. 2 hours later, her sister arrived to pick her up. Tension in the air was palpable. As my sister-in-law entered and saw the suitcases, "What really happened?" she asked me directly. I didn't have to answer. My wife handed her phone with one of the videos playing. I watched my sister-in-law's face go from shock to pure disgust as she watched her mother stealing from my desk. "Mom, what else have you done?" My mother-in-law tried her last move: their fake videos. He manipulated them. But my sister-in-law had already seen enough. "Get your things, let's go." My mother-in-law turned to me with a look of pure hatred. "This isn't over. I'm going to destroy you. I walked up to her and, in the calmest voice I could muster, said, "You already tried and you lost. Now get out." I thought that was the end. I was wrong. The war had only changed battlefields. The next morning my wife woke up to her phone vibrating non-stop. It was text messages and Facebook notifications, her friends, neighbors, distant cousins. "How could you throw your own mother out on the street? Your mom is heartbroken. She says her son-in-law manipulated you into hating her. I saw your mother's post. How awful. I'm praying for her. My mother-in-law had launched her nuclear bomb." She had posted a long, tearful story on her Facebook profile. A masterpiece of manipulation, she painted herself as a frail elderly woman, unjustly kicked out by a controlling son-in-law and a brainwashed daughter. She talked about how she only wanted to unite the family and how her heart was broken. She didn't mention the theft call to social services or the pool incident. She was the perfect victim. I watched my wife read the post. Her face a mask of fury and pain. For a second I feared the old doubt would return, but then she looked up and met my gaze with eyes of steel. "Time for being quiet is over." She said she didn't reply to the post, she didn't start a comment war. She did something much smarter. She created a WhatsApp group with key family members and sent a single message. "I know many of you have seen my mother's post. Before anything else, I ask you to watch this. The facts speak for themselves." She attached the videos of the theft, the sabotage and the audio of the call to social services. Then, with a terrifying calm, she posted a single public comment under her mother's post. "Mom, it breaks my heart that you've chosen to make this public with a version so far from reality. The decision we made was the hardest of my life and it was to protect my daughter. I'm not going to engage in a war here. Our close family already knows the whole truth." It was checkmate. The mother-in-law's post was exposed for what it was, a lie. Within hours, the tone of the messages changed. The friends who had attacked her now wrote to apologize. The family, now armed with irrefutable proof, took our side shortly after we noticed my mother-in-law had deleted her post, unable to bear the humiliation her last weapon had blown up in her face. Now she was completely alone. That night my wife did something that showed me the healing had truly begun. She took an old velvet box from the closet. Inside was a pile of jewelry, rings, bracelets, a pearl necklace. "What's this?" I asked. "It's the jewelry my mother gave me," she said, her voice firm. "Every piece came with a condition, with a favor, with a string attached. They aren't gifts, they're shackles." The next day we went to a pawn shop together. We sold every piece. We didn't want to keep anything that reminded us of that venomous snake with the money. We planned our next family vacation. That afternoon we sat down with our daughter. "Remember how you've always wanted to go to the amusement park in Orlando?" My wife asked her. "Remember how Grandma always said it was a waste of time and money?" My daughter nodded, a shadow of sadness in her eyes. My wife continued, taking her hands. "Grandma was wrong. Your dreams are not a waste of time. They are the most important thing. And we're going on our next vacation. How does that sound?" My daughter's eyes widened like saucers, filled with tears of pure disbelief and happiness. The specific cruelty of the mother-in-law, who had not only excluded her but also belittled her wishes, was being dismantled and turned into the fuel to fulfill those very dreams. That night, as my daughter slept, my wife looked at me and said, "My mother was stealing our happiness little by little. Now it's time to get that happiness back." For the first time in years, my house felt like the home it was always meant to be. Few months later, the echo of the war had faded. We turned the old guest suite, former Viper's Nest, into our family movie theater. The nights of screaming and tension were replaced by movie marathons with popcorn. Our daughter's laughter was now the only sound that filled that hallway. True conclusion came with a phone call. It was my sister-in-law. My wife stepped away to talk and when she returned her face was an indecipherable mix of sadness and relief. She sat next to me in silence for a long moment. "What happened?" I asked quietly. She took a deep breath. It was my sister. She couldn't take it anymore. The lies, the manipulation, trying to turn her against her own husband, it was the same old pattern. She paused and looked at me. "They had her committed, Mom is in a nursing home." The news fell into the room like a stone. There was no celebration, no joy, just the weight of an inevitable conclusion. "My sister and I will pay for it half and half." My wife continued, her voice breaking, "It's the best place they could find, but that's her life now." I held her tight. "You didn't put her there," I whispered. "She built that road herself, brick by brick. That night my wife tore up the 3 unopened letters her mother had sent a few days earlier as a final closure. Our daughter, free from the shadow of disapproval, become a more confident, louder, happier child. One night, my wife took my hands and said something that broke me and healed me at the same time. My family is you and her. No one else. Forgive me for taking so long to see it. Now I ask you, what would you have done in my place? Was I too harsh, or should I have acted sooner at it? We kept our promise. We went to Orlando last month. Seeing my daughter meet her favorite characters, screaming with excitement on every ride, was the moment I knew we had truly won.